After being in Hobart for a week, on Sunday morning 27th of August, I went on a bus to Oatlands, about an hour and a half north of Hobart. I stayed in a studio apartment called Robinson's Cottage, next to a bar called the Imbibers. This is the town hall and council chambers. The town has over 100 beautifully made stone buildings, inns, public buildings, churches and houses. This building is the commissariat. In the convict days, it was the food store, locked and guarded. Later, the building was converted into a bakery. It could bake 60 loaves. This impressive building is the warden's house for the old jail. The jail wall seen here has been halved in height from its original 20 feet. The town had its own Supreme Court, built in 1829 by convicts. In the 1830s, the building was upgraded by the colonial architect John Lee Archer, who is probably a distant relative of mine. The Supreme Court obtained new rooms and a new grand ceiling structure. I saw some bonnets on display. They were bonnets of convict women, but these are replicas. They originally came from an exhibition at Cascade's Female Factory in Hobart in 2019, and I saw them there. The court overlooks Lake Dulverton, which is seen here with the weather rolling around. The building at centre right is called Vintage on High Cafe, run by a Ukrainian woman who has lived here for about 20 years. Her house is the stone house to the left, which was renovated by her. Inside the cafe is an old coffee grinding machine, as much art as it is function. The town has a windmill called Cullington Mill, built in 1837 by John Vincent, who was a publican, on a design taken from England, from Lincolnshire. There are a number of the old buildings still existing. These are the old stables, beautifully kept. There are also gardens there, but these are not open to the public. However, you can look over the fence. In the grounds there is a storehouse for barrels of liquor and another storehouse for wheat and flour. The new buildings here are the whisky distillery and the restaurant, adjacent to the old caretaker's house. And there is an obligatory rustic truck painted red. This one is a Chevrolet. The house here is called Elm Cottage. It was built in about 1837. In the late 1840s, an Irish rebel who had been transported for sedition, Kevin Izod O'Doherty, lodged here. I'm suspecting that he met my great-great-grandmother, Sarah Crosby. Mass was held in this house during 1850 because the Catholic Church was then under construction. Kevin and Sarah, both Irish, probably met at Mass. Note the shiny roof of the house. It was installed just the day before. There's a plaque out the front of Elm Cottage that tells you the history of the house. Another fine building, Oatlands Lodge, was built in the 1830s by James Weeding, one of the town's pioneers. The plaque for Oatlands Lodge tells us that the building was later used as a girls' school, and there was a bootmaker's shop out the front as well. Here are some more of the stone buildings in High Street. You can see Cullington Windmill in the background. Lake Frederick Inn is another fine stone building, also built in the 1830s. This one by George Aitchison, who was both a convict and a stonemason. He also built St. Peter's Anglican Church. The plaque says that as well as being the Lake Frederick Inn, it was also known as the Lake Dulverton Inn and later on the White Horse Inn. There is no great significance to this photo, I just liked it. The buildings, the tree and flower, the view to the distant fields and hills, and the pile of firewood. The town also had its own street library. I found my way to the Oatlands District Historical Society, a museum and history room staffed by enthusiastic volunteers who attempted to answer all my questions. This plaque depicts the origin of Oatlands, first as a convict quarters and also an inland administrative centre for Van Diemen's Land as early as the 1820s. The war against the blacks, which occurred around 1830, was conducted from here. I wanted to find out where my great-great-grandmother, Sarah Crosby, worked when she was in Oatlands in 1850. I discovered it was at the Wilmot Arms, this building, which was later extended and became the Midlands Hotel. This is the original part of the hotel when it was the Wilmot Arms. Now it is a fenced-off development site, and it has been changed so much that it's not even a heritage building. The building here is the stables, which is now the home of the Pancake and Crepe Shop. They serve a very nice scallop crepe. The Ukrainian lady in the Vintage on High Cafe worked here when she first came to town. It was very quiet in Oatlands at night. High Street with no people. I took a photo of the antique shop which I'd looked at during the day. To my surprise, there was a tuba hanging up which I had managed not to see during the daytime. I visited the various churches. The first one I went to was St. Peter's Anglican Church, completed in 1841, built by the convict George Aitchison. The designer of St. Peter's Church was John Lee Archer, the colonial architect, who had also designed the Supreme Court in town. St. Peter's has its own cemetery, still in use. It dates from about 1860. The Uniting Church is on the highest hill in town. It was originally Presbyterian, although to be more particular, it was the Campbell Free Church. It was built in 1856, but the steeple soon collapsed in a storm and had to be rebuilt. The Catholic Church is called St. Paul's. When I spoke to the priest here, he said, "Did you come to look at the architecture?" What he was alluding to was the fact that the church was designed by Augustus Pugin, who was a famous English architect. For example, Pugin designed the clock tower which houses Big Ben in London. You might note that there is no cemetery around the church. The Catholic cemetery is outside of town, about 1 kilometre away. This is the church that was being built when Sarah Crosby was in town. On the way to the cemetery, I passed this lovely stone wall. It's at the corner of High Street and Stanley Street, which is the street that goes down to the cemetery. And this is the entrance to the old Oatlands General Cemetery. It was used from 1827 through to the 1850s. This is the first time I've been in a cemetery that was also a sheep paddock. There were plenty of spring lambs around. This is the tomb of Charles Sutton. Charles Sutton was the publican of the Wilmot Arms, which is where Sarah Crosby worked. Charles Sutton died in 1856. He's the only one buried here. His widow married again, and she's buried somewhere else. This photo is taken from the old General Cemetery, looking towards the Roman Catholic Cemetery, which is in current use.